everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Tiffany Benson, one part of Team Benson, and today we are going to talk about how I make compost without animals. Now guys, I just got done filling all of the beds behind me. As you can see, everything's gone but the big giant tomato plant, and the one back here too as well. But I just got done filling all of the beds with compost, and I only used one bag of purchased compost. The rest I made here by myself. I'm pretty proud of this because for those of you guys that don't know, when I originally built these beds, each one of these big beds took about 10 to 15 bags of soil and compost. Now, the one thing that no one tells you when you are building a garden is that soil and compost are going to be your most expensive thing when you're first starting to build a garden. So I was very excited that each year when the soil depletes, I found a way to be able to add more of my own homemade compost to these beds. And I used worms. Now, for those of you guys that have been watching my channel, you know that I have used the worm bin, the in-ground worm bin, to make worm castings and kind of help the soil that way. But I also take all of the soil that has been in my pots and I make compost with that. So I compost directly in my pots. Now, I filmed the process of how I did all this, so I'm going to cut to that and show you guys that right now. Alright guys, so I now have all of this cleared out all the way up to there, and then I have this cleared out too as well. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure I get all of the little leaves off of this bell pepper plant so that I can bury that a little bit, and then I'm going to add some potting soil, some spent potting soil once I remove the wood chips, and then top it off with compost. So that old potting soil that had the cabbages in there, I'm going to knock off all the potting soil as much as I can from the roots because I don't want to put just a whole big clump in there, and then I'm going to top it off with the compost. Alright guys, so now that the wood chips are removed, I'm going to go through and add some of the potting mix. Now you can see some of these are really, really low. Look at that. So that potting mix is going to really help not only to add like some coco coir and peat moss into the soil, but it's also going to help to fill that space so I don't have to use so much compost. So I just wanted to show you guys really quickly, look at how dark this soil is. And it's that dark because if you dig around in here, I know I just saw a little worm, you can see little worms. There's one right there. Now, by me adding the worm castings from my worm bin to this, it put little worm eggs in there and therefore also put some worms in there. So this cabbage, these roots, are almost actually decomposed because there are worms in here eating them. And so now this potting soil is going to be even more richer in this bed because it's going to be full of worm castings. That's why it's so dark. So just to drive the point home even further, this is the last of the cabbage roots. So this is pretty much all that is left from those big cabbages that were in there. Now, this started off as regular potting soil because I put potting soil with a scoop of my worm compost in this pot. So this went from something that looked like, here I'll show you guys, let me go grab it. So it went from something that looked like this, which is potting soil, to something that looked like this, which is now essentially a big thing of worm poop. So that is kind of how you can recycle and make sure that your soil is being used all the way. You don't want to just have spent soil. And having composting worms really do make a difference, which is why I left this pot with its roots in it for a while so that it can start composting down. Alright guys, so now I have filled my beds with all of the potting soil. Now, I want to remind you that this is just regular cheap potting soil from the box store. And as you can see, almost all those roots are gone. Instead of having big, thick roots that were covering this whole pot, the worms have made really good work of it by almost devouring all of those big cabbage roots and by leaving their little poop. So now it's time to add and top it off with compost. Alright, and now we are covered with a fresh layer of compost. The beds are completely full, and what would have normally taken about 2 to 3, maybe even 4 bags of compost now only took one bag of compost. Now I can also repeat that process with the pots too as well if you are just growing in containers. What I do for my containers is that I take half the soil out, the ones that I've completely let composted down with the worms, and I take half that soil and I separate it between all of the pots, and then I just top it off with a little bit of potting mix. In containers you do want the potting mix because you do want to make sure that you have that coco coir and the perlite and just all the things that come in potting soil in order to keep the pot from drying out too much. But by having the worms in there and having that compost and those castings in there, it really does help with growing a lot of really healthy vegetables in your containers, and your worms can continue to do the work that they normally would do in ground, but just do it in containers. So in these 2 days of the rest of my beds, I'm not going to put any mulch over them. I'm just gonna let the amazing Arizona sun do what it does best, and that is sterilize soil. So out of anything like any funguses or anything like that that might have been growing in the pot due to a lot of watering or anything like that, I'm going to let that kind of bake in the sun. The also amazing thing that happens is that the pots had so much life in them. There were all different types of worms, there were pill bugs, all the different composting like little insects are now in those pots. And so what I like to do is when I let them go in there and I water it really deeply, that brings all those little insects, like the abundance of them, up. And then we have the wonderful little geckos that love my garden waiting right there. So that controls the population of composting bugs. And the soil is pretty much already composted down with all of the roots. So now it is ready to plant out once I kind of give it the 2 days that it needs to kind of rest. So that's pretty much the cycle that I use in order to grow my own soil and make my own compost. So I hope this gives you some ideas of what you can do for your garden. Also, it can save you a ton of money because not only do I buy less compost, I also buy less potting mix because I don't need as much potting mix as I did before, since I'm pretty much using the potting mix that's already there, and I have been for a couple of years now. So it's just about refreshing the pots with a little bit and topping it off with a little bit in the beds too as well. But I hope this guy gives you guys some ideas on different things that you can do for your garden, and I hope your gardens are going amazing right now as you either prepare to start growing things, or you're like me in the Arizona desert and you're ready for summer garden planting already, even though it's only still April. But until next time, grow yourselves a garden, because even a small space can provide you with tons of food. Bye guys.